When I was preparing for this, I was thinking
Canadian values.
And today, I will use those values again as we face this most serious crisis in a generation.
Because abuse is abuse is abuse.
Mike Carney, the new Canadian Prime Minister, is going to use Canadian values to rule this country. I read his book. Shall we see what his values are, if any? Hello, welcome back. Glad you're here. And if you have friends or family or people who you think might see some of this stuff and benefit, please do pass it on. So I just finished Mike Carney's book called Values. It's a fascinating book. I enjoyed it. But do we want this man to be Prime Minister of Canada?
Values.
But also, I find fascinating is that a lot of Canadians don't read the book. You really want to know what this man stands for? Read the book, because I haven't read anything or heard anything from him which is different. Let's delve into his values. I did a video a little while ago and I asked Mark Carney, what are the values? What are Canadian values? Now, we first of all need to look at his values, the way he expresses that in his book. It's extremely dangerous. And please, people, don't take my word for it. You can find it, and I'll put the videos or the websites on the screen. But go check it out. So Mark Carney was the chairman of a company called GFANS. It was in Glasgow, in Scotland, I believe. Now, Carney, as you can see in his book, is an absolute believer in climate change. After all, climate change is an issue that, one, involves the entire world, from which no one will be able to self-isolate. Two, is predicted by science to be the central risk tomorrow. And three, we can address only if we act in advance and in solidarity. Climate change had to reduce the temperature 1.5 degrees by 2025. And when Mark Carney was in this investment group, GFANS, look it up, they invested $1.3 trillion into climate change programs.
at that point, there was about $5 trillion of private financial assets that were committed to be managed to net zero, not just sustainability, but to net zero explicitly. And that figure is now over $130 trillion, or 40% of all global financial assets. In other words, financial firepower on the scale that's required.
To bring the temperature down. This was 2020, 2021, 22. It's supposed to bring the temperature down 1.5 degrees. Well, guess what? It didn't. The temperature didn't go down. Well, can you imagine if you've given out over $1 trillion and you're the bank manager and you're the guy that's in charge of that and didn't work? No, I'm just saying, he needs to find a place to put his values program, taking care of the climate to bring the temperature down, someplace.
Now, I feel like everything in my life has helped prepare me for this moment. 2 months ago, I put up my hand to run for leader because I felt we needed big changes.
Really, he is bowing down at the idol of climate change, his climate change god.
Climate change, addressing climate change, and I've spent
huge part of my career, addressing it both in terms of policy and leading the largest clean energy investor in the world, okay? But a big part of climate change is about the economic.
If you read his book and you check how many times the word climate change comes up, you'd be utterly amazed. His book is 600 pages. The word values, comes up 1,131 times. The book is 600 pages. That means on every page, the word values comes up almost twice. He is obsessed with making you think that he has values, that he has Canadian values. He's obsessed with it. And the Canadian people are buying it.
But big change is guided by strong Canadian values. The values I learned at the dinner table from my parents, Bob and Verley, and my three siblings, Brenda, Sean, and Brian. Values that I learned at the hockey rinks of Edmonton.
So we hear from Mark Carney that he has his values from his mom and dad and his siblings, and what I find really interesting and strange at the same time, the hockey rink. So a prime minister who tells you that he gets his values from the hockey rink should put some flags up. Not because they don't like hockey. In a minute, I'm going to get one of the Calgary Flames players from the past saying something. But he said that he had Canadian values, and that's good. But what are those values? What are the Canadian values? I've asked him that in a previous video, and of course he's not going to answer. Nobody really wants to define what Canadian values are. Not Pierre Poilievre, not Mark Carney. Trudeau certainly didn't. What are Canadian values? Well, we just have to look at the past, and we can see the values that Canadians had. Canadian values are written on the stones of the House of Parliament. Now, whatever you want to say about that, biblical texts in our Parliament, fine, say it. But you cannot deny that that is Canadian values. You simply cannot. Should you would be a revisionist. The values that we have are certainly not the ones that Canadians had. At the same time, when men like Carney and Trudeau and others continue to push on us as Canadian people what we should have as values, it's almost abusive. It's almost an abusive relationships. They take from you what they want, and you begin to depend on them for everything. Healthcare, marketing boards, that they don't touch your money in the bank. Now, that's strange, don't you think? That you would depend on them and actually trust them? Well, that comes down to your values. Are your values allowing others to dictate to you how you must live?
We know the way through this pandemic is by getting everyone vaccinated. And the overwhelming majority, close to 90% of Canadians, have done exactly that. The small fringe minority of people who are on their way to Ottawa or who are holding unacceptable views that they're expressing do not represent the views of Canadians who have been there for each other, who know.
There's so much going on in his book on values that the connection I need to make between what Trudeau just said with COVID and Mark Carney is in this little clip. And you can find clips like this all over the place. But listen to this.
Skepticism about ESG labels or sustainable labels, and that again is one of the reasons we're having this ruthless, relentless focus on net zero, because in the end, look, we can't stabilize the climate unless we get to net zero, and it's a simple, these are hard numbers. Your emissions are either A or B, they're going up or down.
Okay, so Mark Carney says we've got to do something about getting things to net zero. Just like COVID, we all need vaccinations to stop the spread. We all now need, according to Mark Carney, to be on board to get everything to net zero. You see why they're the same? There's the argument for you to use. You needed vaccines for COVID. Everyone has to do it. You need everyone to agree to get to net zero. Extremely dangerous. And Mark Carney will use what he needs because he thinks it's a crisis. Welcome to Canada's new Prime Minister. Now, how does this relate to it being an abusive relationship? Let's give Theo Fleury a few minutes from a testimony that he gave recently.
Because abuse is abuse is abuse. And we use abuse to get people to stay in line, and we fill them with fear. And when and when you're traumatized and you're not on a healing journey, you can't think critically. It's impossible to think critically because you know what you're doing? All you're doing is trying to survive. That's it. And then the government sets it up where, geez, I got to work so that I can feed my family and put gas in my car and go to work. And that's all you're focused on. You're not focused on the outside issues. You're not even thinking that you're being abused by the government at all.
Now, I feel like everything in my life has helped prepare me for this moment. 2 months ago, I put up my hand to run for leader because I felt we needed big changes.
And there's only one entity that we can reach out and ask for help, and that's God. And that's what happened to me on September 17th of 2005.
Is Carney going to do the same that Trudeau did when it comes to climate thinking? Well, his book is very clear in one thing, and that is that we all must believe in climate change. His values allow him to call me, as a senior, an old guy, a boomer, voracious. He does that in his book. Everything points to a really dangerous man who is going to be worse than Trudeau. You heard it here first. He is not going to let those of us who understand that there's a difference between what a government does, what a family does, what a church does, he's not going to let that happen. He's going to force you. And how does he do that? Well, again, in his book, through the incentive of money. He'll withhold it. Now, if that's not an abusive situation, and then coaching it in values, then I don't know what abusive situations are. So what do we need to do? Go back to the scripture. Oh, Carney in his book, he diligently went to church in 2020 in a New Year service, and he says everything points to us not having a name for ourselves in the future, etc., etc. It's right there in his book. He is flying the flag of Carney, the flag of carnage. Let's not underestimate it, and please, if you've watched this far, let's resist it with all our might. Legally, but resist it, we will. His values clearly show that he has no idea that God comes first and that God allows the freedom and liberties granted to each and every one of us based around the standard of his word, 10 Commandments, and that there's the family, there's the church, and there's the state. He's got it all mixed up in his book that he thinks show the values that we all must believe. Because he loves